Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Parsha class at ASBI. I'm Sofia Freudenstein, the Maharat intern here at ASBI, and we're going to be learning some Parsha. And for those of you who have been here for a while now, we're on class 21, which is really exciting. We've been looking at passages from our Parsha, seeing how the Gemara takes some of these passages and looks at them in a whole new light, and hopefully we can use that as a way to understand our Parsha anew as a kind of commentary. It's been pretty fun so far. I think we've come up with some pretty interesting ideas, and I'm excited for us to all be collaborating on this evening. So I'm going to paste a link to the source sheet in the chat. And I will also share my screen as I usually do. Let me make sure I have the right screen open. Amazing. Okay, now I will share. Awesome. Okay, it's loading. There we go. Okay, hopefully people can see it. I'm gonna make it a little bit larger for us. Okay, this week's Parsha is Parsha Tisa. Lots of things happen in this week's Parsha, but probably most famously is the story of the sin of the golden calf, where Bnei Israel are very anxious that Moshe has not come down at Mount Sinai after 40 days, and they're nervous about where he went, and they succumb to wanting to have some kind of idol worship, I guess, to compensate for their lack of connection with Moshe and God at that time. Aaron, Moshe's brother, actually makes it for them. And chaos ensues. Obviously, that was not the ideal plan for them to be doing that. We heard in the Ten Commandments that we read a few weeks ago that we should not be having idolatry, and yet the golden calf emerges. And it's a really turbulent time. God is so angry that Bnei Israel made the golden calf that God even threatens to destroy Bnei Israel, and Moshe has to petition on their behalf. Instead, the compromise that seems to happen is that God says, great, I'm going to send out some kind of plague. And also the Levites who are there kind of offer to fight on God's behalf. It's a little bit violent, and it's a very odd chapter. The part that I think is interesting about this week's Parsha is that we often don't think about what comes next, which is chapter 33 and chapter 34 of Exodus. We might be familiar with it because the liturgy from, let's say, High Holidays, the 13 attributes of God, comes from there. But the whole story in chapter 33 and 34 is quite weird. And that's what I want to talk about today and talk about as a group, because I want to think more carefully about what exactly is happening in those chapters and why are they happening at that moment in time. And I'm excited for us to explore that together. So to catch us up, I'm going to read us the first 11 verses of chapter 33. So this is right after the plague that God sends out, after some killing, after the golden calf, which was in chapter 32. And so this is what it says. V'yedaber Adonai el Moshe, lech alei mizeh ata v'ha'am asher ha'elita me'eretz Mitzrayim, el ha'aretz asher nishbati la'Avraham, li'Yitzchak u'li'Yaakov le'mor le'zaracha etnena. Then God said to Moses, set out from here, you and the people that you have brought up from the land of Egypt to the land that I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying to your offspring, I will give it. Now we continue to the next pasuk. V'shalachti lefanecha malach v'givrashti et ha'Kanaani ha'Amori v'Chiti v'Perizi v'Chivi v'Yebusi. And I'll send in front of you an angel or some kind of protector, and I will send out the nations that are living in the land, the Kanaani, Amorim, Chiti, Perizim, Chivim, and Yebusim. This is a little bit odd, just as I'm reading out, thinking about it. Like we just saw this crazy story about the plague and the calf, and God was going to destroy the people. Moshe petitions, and now it's interesting that this is what we're being promised, is that we're going to be able to return to the land. Okay, verse 3. El eretz zavat chalav v'dvash ki lo ele b'kirbacha ki am kshe oref ata pen achalacha baderech. And so then God says, I'm going to take you to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go in your midst, since you are stiff-necked people, lest I destroy you on the way. So we're getting promised to return to the Holy Land, but God is not going to be as direct in this process. So maybe that's why it comes up, is that Moshe petitioned for us that we're going to be able to get to the land. We're not going to get destroyed in the process, but there needs to be a kind of distancing. Okay, like there's a messenger sent out and not necessarily God. Okay, verse 4. Vayishma ha'am et hadavar hara hazeh v'yitablu v'lo shatu ish edio alav. When the people heard this harsh word, they went into mourning, and none put on finery. This is like a very for me, I often don't think about this, like when I hear this story, that there is more of like an interaction of God being frustrated at Bnei Israel and sharing that, and then Bnei Israel feeling frustrated themselves. They didn't put on their finery is like an interesting detail. The term edio is also like quite unusual. Okay. ויאמר אדוני אל משה, אמור אל בני ישראל, אתם עם קשי עורף, רגע אחד אעלה בקרבך וכיליתיך, ואתה הורד ידיך מעליך וידעה מה אעשה לך. Okay, so this is verse 5. God says to Moses, say to the Israelite people, you are stiff-necked people. If I were to go into your midst for one moment, I would destroy you. Now then, leave off your finery and I will consider what to do with you. A pretty harsh idea of God. I mean, God is frustrated. Maybe we could say rightfully so. I mean, it feels pretty intense to assume that God was so angry that we could be destroyed. But maybe God is hurt by what happened. We're going to explore a little bit about why exactly God would be hurt by this. And God needs some space. Okay. So the Israelites remained and took off their finery, starting from Har Chorev, which is Mount Sinai, onward, they stopped wearing it. משה ייקח את האוהל ונטל לו מחוץ למחנה, הרחיק מן המחנה וקרא לו אוהל מועד, והיה כל מבקש אדוני יצא אל אוהל מועד אשר מחוץ למחנה. So the idea of the Ohel Moed, or the tent of meeting, is something that we think about when we think about what was happening in the desert. But what seems to be clarified here is that this was not the given right away. There wasn't this assumption that there would be this tent of meeting. There probably would have been a more direct connection between God and Bnei Israel. And now, after the sin of the golden calf, there needs to be more of a distancing where God is situated outside of the camp in a tent. So that is what's being promised here. Moshe takes the tent, puts it outside of the camp, and distances from the camp, and that's called the Ohel Moed. And anyone who wishes to seek out God goes out to the Ohel Moed that's outside the camp. והיה כצאת משה אל האוהל ויקומו כל העם וניצבו איש פתח אהלו והביטו אחרי משה עד באוהל האוהלה. And so when Moshe would leave the tent of meeting, everyone would get up and stand at the entrance of their own tents and see where Moshe was coming from, right? They noticed that if Moshe leaves the tent of meeting, because that's who went in to go converse with God, they would, I guess, respect Moshe, seeing that he had left and observed. Okay, we're almost done, and then I hope we can open up to discussion, because I feel like this is a very interesting paradigm for how we should be relating to God. And when Moshe would go into the tent, a pillar of cloud would descend and stand on the entrance of the tent while God spoke to Moshe. And everyone would see when the pillar of cloud was standing at the entrance of the tent, and they would get up and even bow to it. ודיבר אדוני אל משה פנים אל פנים, כאשר ידבר איש אל רעהו. ושב אל המחנה ומשרתו יהושע בן נון נער לא ימיש מתוך האוהל. And God would then converse with Moshe face to face, metaphorical, but suggesting some kind of closeness, just as a person would speak to their friend. And then they would return back to the camp. And then also Moshe's right-hand man, Yehoshua ben Nun, who eventually would become the leader of the Jewish people after Moshe, would not leave outside of the tent. So this to me, it feels like a surprising passage. When I think about like the history of Bnei Israel in the desert, I think about the golden calf. That's what's like placed in the Ten Commandments movie. Like that's of an event that I'm familiar with, and I don't often think about what the repercussions were, and that the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, was one of those things. And then there's this whole procession about how to deal with it. So I'm curious what people think why this was the result of the sin of the golden calf, how they feel about this being the way we converse with God now, and any other thoughts, reactions, or questions that they have when reading this piece. Yeah, Barry, start us off.
My turn. Okay.
Sure.
Got a few things going here in my head.
Sure.
First of all, I forgot exactly where we were in this chapter. So we've already been through the taking of the sides. They who are for God stand by me, and all the Levim come and surround Moshe, and those who were not were elsewhere, and then the Levim slaughtered even their own brothers if they had to satisfy that admonishment by Moshe Rabbeinu. But before this, one of the things that I think of when I think about this is that face to face, that Hashem and Moshe communicate with each other. Now, Moshe, every thought, every feeling he has, and everything that goes through his heart is known to God, just like all of us. But Moshe, prior to this and along the way, shows correct, proper behavior and communications, like when Moshe would go up and down earlier before the giving of the Torah. It was God would tell Moshe to tell the people something, and then Moshe would come and report to us, and then people would respond. We hear, we'll obey, and then Moshe goes back up early the next morning and reports to God that the people are in agreement. And Rashi comments that Moshe doesn't have to do this. Moshe could have thought, hey, God knows everything that's going on. I don't really have to tell God what the people said. God knows what the people said. But Rashi says that Moshe is behaving properly. He's still going back to communicate to his master what's happening. So this is part of it. There's a propriety going on here, and the face-to-face is not literally face-to-face because Moshe would die. But it is what Rashi also comments as a reduction of the veil between God and communicating with all the other Naviim about dreamlike states and things like that. And I imagine even with Abraham Avinu back at the, he was still Abraham, wasn't at the time of the covenant between the parts, the pieces. So even Abraham was in a dreamlike state, the dark, the dusk to the dark and all that kind of thing. So Moshe is a one unique dude. He's got God's attention on a direct basis, and God doesn't veil God's words to be interpreted. God tells Moshe what he wants to tell the people to improve and to streamline the communications. And it's mastery between the two of them. It's just like Moshe is the newborn first son, the new firstborn son, because he's getting all that attention. Also, it comes after Moshe is on the Har and he comes down, and this is a key pivotal point for me that ties us together. The people of Israel, we are told by Rashi commentary that Moshe is like our king, and he's never anointed. He is definitely designated, but he's never anointed by God with an anointing oil or anything like that. But he is still like our king. From the time we were in Egypt to the time we come out to the time we're in all the way through till the time he dies in Har Nevo. So he's like this. He's also our Kohen until Aaron and his sons are anointed and installed. So Moshe has these roles, and he's like the righteous guy of his time. And when he was on Har Sinai and the golden calf incident was happening below, God tells Moshe, go back down to your people, not my people, your people, and straighten this out. There's rebellion going on there. There's avodah zarah partying going on down there. Go down to your people. And Rashi comments that those aren't just the Israelites. Those are really the assembled multitudes that came out with us, that instigated our scared nature, our fears that Moshe was up on the Har too long, and we were subject to these invasions of these bad thoughts and these fears by the assembled multitudes. And that's what Rashi comments, and I think is going on here. And Aaron seemed to be forced to do what he had to do. I'm not sure that was ideal. In fact, I'm pretty sure it wasn't ideal, but I think he did what he could to buy Moshe more time. So, but coming down from the mount, Moshe was commanded to go down to the mount, from the mount, and take care of this. And Rashi comments on there that at that time when Moshe went up, he went up leading this amazing people that God had chosen. And then when the golden calf comes up, Moshe is told, get back down to your people. And it was as if, the comment goes, it is as if the heavenly court and God were ready to strip Moshe of his righteousness and his aura, his positions, because, and this is the tie, all along, Moshe has been leading us, and he has been our king, and his righteousness has stood for us. Now, at the Har, before this particular chapter 33:1, but nearby, right, when Moshe has to come down, the court has decided if Bnei Israel is subject to death, then what good is Moshe? His job, his designation, his charge was to lead us out from Mitzrayim, but finish the job to take us to the promised land. And without a people living who were meritorious to get there,
Right.
he didn't have a job. So all of a sudden, it becomes clear that the knot is now tied at both ends, not just tied at our end, where Moshe can pull the rope with us and pull us along, and where we slip, he pulls, and when we're okay, he's teaching and all this kind of thing. But now his knot is tied at his end, because without us, he's nothing all of a sudden. So
Right.
we are tied together now. It's a pivotal point in the relationship going forward in the Midbar with Moshe and us.
Absolutely.
It's just a fantastic place. And I think the timing of such what's going on is God is defining. God says, if I would be amongst you for a moment, I destroy you. And God's moment is way, 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 way exponentially longer than our moment. So
Totally.
God is extremely patient. Go for it. I'm sorry, you want to get in there. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what I'm noticing that you're pointing out here, and then I'm going to call on Marilyn, and then hopefully we can move on. Is that Moshe is here? There's like a pragmatic reason why Moshe is here, and then also one where he's advocating for us, right? Like all the way back in Parsha Yitro, we had the 10 Commandments. It's clear that ideally, God was supposed to talk to us directly and deliver the 10 Commandments, and Bnei Israel got scared. And then they asked for Moshe to be a conduit. They wanted someone to be an intermediary, so they didn't feel so overwhelmed and close to God. And then now it's funny, because now God is saying, well, I can't even be near you because I'm so angry, I might destroy you. Which is interesting for you to think about it relationally. That first Bnei Israel are not interested in being so close to God, and now God is kind of threatening to be too close. You can imagine that being a really interesting dynamic. And then Moshe kind of being caught in the middle as both our advocate, and he did so in the last chapter to make sure we stayed alive, because that is what his job was. But also now he's the only one that can really get close to God, and there's a sadness to it. So it is very complicated. Marilyn, did you want to share something?
I had a question.
Sure.
At the end of the paragraph, and he would then return to the camp, and he is Moshe, but his attendant Joshua, son of Nun, would not stir out of the tent. So did Moses and Joshua go into the tent together, and then Moses came out and Joshua stayed in?
That's a great question. Sorry. Yeah, we're going to say more.
I was going to say, I just don't understand it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I hadn't even noticed that until you said it. I wonder if it's almost like you can't have the tent be empty. That if Moshe is going to deliver the good news to Bnei Israel about what God said, that Yoshua needs to be in there instead. That's really fascinating. I would have to do a little bit more research into that, but I think that's a really interesting dynamic. It makes us think what exactly is this tent of meeting to begin with? What's happening in there? So yeah, I think that's a really great observation. Thank you.
I have a quick comment on that one, and a quick.
I unfortunately, Barry, I think we have to move on to this. We haven't even gotten to the Gemara yet, so hopefully you can hear it at the end of the class.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good.
So I think we point out some interesting things, right? What is the role of Moshe throughout all of this? There's a sense of distancing. What exactly is the function of the Ohel Moed? What I want to look at is a Gemara that talks about an interesting layer to the Moshe aspect of all these verses. And I wonder if it can teach us something about what exactly is happening in these verses. Why is it coming now? What can it teach us about Bnei Israel's relationship to God at this time? And so that's what I want to do next for us. So this is from Masechet Sanhedrin, which we have seen before, which is a lot of discussion about how the courts were run. However, this is from the last chapter of Sanhedrin, which is called Perichelek, which is a lot of discussion of what you can and cannot believe, or what is regarded as heresy. But it becomes this really fun opportunity to just have a lot of amazing commentaries, almost like midrashi, about different verses in the Torah. So this one I think is very interesting. It says the following. I'll read in English for the sake of simplicity. With regard to the verse, and Moses heard and he fell on his face. This is a verse from Bamidbar. This is when Korach, who is there to challenge Moses' authority, and he responds by falling on his face in shock. The Gemara asks, what report did he hear that elicited that reaction? What was so shocking? Just being challenged in authority, or something else was going on? Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Yonatan says he heard that they suspected him, Moshe, of adultery with a married woman, as it stated, and they were jealous of Moshe in the camp. This is a pasuk from Tehillim. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak says this teaches that each and every man warned his wife to distance herself from Moshe and to not enter in seclusion with him, as it stated, and Moshe would take the tent and pitch it outside the camp. It was due to this slander that he withdrew from the camp. So this is something that I had never encountered until I found this Gemara. And this is a very unusual read of what we read. Like before, we were reading kind of all of these mechanics and logistics of what the relationship with God was going to look like after the sin of the golden calf. It required putting the tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed, outside of the camp. It required Moshe having to go talk to God and then deliver the message back. But now we have a totally different reading of why Moshe left the camp. And it's that they were concerned, the Bnei Israel were concerned, or there was rumors going around that Moshe was sleeping with married women in the camp, and they banished him from being in the camp, which is quite shocking. I think that there's a lot of different ways that we could take it. I'm curious if people have thoughts of why this would be a rumor that was going around and what's going on there. And I have my own thoughts, but I'm curious what your own are before we get there. This is a pretty shocking rumor about Moshe. Does anyone else want to share that hasn't had a chance yet?
Please, go for it, guys.
I'll share. This is Audrey. I'm sorry, my dog wants to go outside though. I'm sorry, that's on the recording.
I hope your dog is joining us also. Yeah.
Yeah, he's an old guy. I'm speculating people did not understand what was going on, and maybe people have always liked to gossip. And so word spread, they made up this rumor. I mean, I find it shocking, but I don't find it shocking that people would gossip and that other people would believe it. So that's my theory.
Yeah, gossip is a tale as old as time, I guess. So yeah, that's an interesting point. I wonder, then the question is, so why is this the rumor that's going around in particular? Thank you for sharing, Audrey. Anyone else who hasn't had a chance yet want to share?
Come on to the table. Come on, guys.
And I'm sorry, is it the rumor that he's having extramarital relations with a married person?
With women in the camp. Yeah.
Lots of women. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll let someone else take.
It's quite unusual.
I have to take the dog out.
Sure.
Oh, but in my turn.
Sure, Barry, go for it. For the sake of time, I maybe make sure to try and have the answer a little bit more concise. But
yeah, I got it concise for you. This happens later on too. I buy this comment as the people being susceptible to it. First of all, we were susceptible to the what I mentioned before about the fear mongering at the golden calf incident. We were scared then. We were scared now. And these bad comments are fuel. They're fuel. They're fire. They're fuel for fire. And later on, when Aaron and Miriam are talking, and Aaron gets admonished and Miriam gets punished with tzara. The commentary that goes on then, and I'm the beneficiary of these kind of commentaries from Rashi, is Miriam trafficked in Moshe being separated from Tzipporah. And Rashi comments that Moshe was separated from Tzipporah because Moshe was on 24/7 call to God. So in order to be God's servant and our servant, he distanced himself, and Tzipporah stuck with him, but was allowing his space. And so even Miriam and Aaron are talking about it later on. So if they talk about it, all the more these people who are subject to these fear mongering by it too. I see it as credible at this point once you know that comment.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting there, right, is that in Bamidbar, right, but what Barry's referencing is that even Miriam and Aaron, Moshe's own siblings, have slander about him. But there, it's that he took he married another woman and was not being close with his current wife, or it's unclear. It's talking about a Cushite woman. Yeah. There's lots of discussion about who that could be. So yes, there is rumors about Moshe's personal life, marital life, which is interesting. So this isn't the first time. This to me feels much stronger, right? Like there it just sounds like, oh, gossip, why isn't he treating his old wife? I mean, it's still horrible, but why isn't he treating his old wife well? And here it's like, actually, he's committing the act of adultery, which like is also, in light of how much halacha they knew at the time, is one of the 10 commandments is to not commit adultery. So it's quite strong. I want to provide a potential answer to this question of why is this the rumor that's going around? And then they kind of shun Moshe outside of the camp. That I think actually will help us understand the position that this story is in our section. And I think that Bnei Israel are having some kind of projection of their own frustrations with intimacy. That's a lot of like technical Freudian terms, so I'll explain myself. But the idea of projection is that sometimes when you interact with people, that you assume certain things about them that actually are true about yourself or things that you are thinking about that you don't necessarily have the language to talk about yet. You're not willing to admit to yourself or potentially issues. And I want to suggest that's what's happening with Bnei Israel here, meaning that they are suggesting that Moshe is adulterous when maybe they themselves are. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that Bnei Israel were going around sleeping with each other. I think that actually this is them struggling with what they did with the golden calf. And that's where I want to take us. And I think this will provide a very interesting approach for what's going on. So this is in the section of the takeaway. I think that the relationship of God to Bnei Israel is almost like a marriage, right? And this isn't my own idea. There's lots of amazing discussions about this, especially around Shavuot time when we receive the Torah, seeing the Torah as a kind of marriage document and seeing Har Sinai as like the chuppah or the wedding canopy under which we and God are married to, and that's what a covenant is. It's a beautiful idea, right? It's instead of feeling like a dogmatic master-servant kind of model to say that this model is between spouses. That's much more partnership-oriented, much more mutual, a really beautiful idea. And so when you think about it, when Bnei Israel took on Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen, when they first heard the Torah, and then 40 days later, they go and build a golden calf, it's a kind of cheating. And that's where I want to take us to now. And then this would make us think, well, when they see Moshe being close with God after what they did, maybe that's them realizing that they cheated, so to say, on God, and they need to do some work. So I want to take us to Aviva Gottlieb-Zornberg, a contemporary commentator. She has amazing books that are quite complicated, but really beautiful. They read almost like poetry. She like draws in midrashim, but also psychoanalysis and literature to illustrate her points. And she has a book of commentary on Exodus called The Particulars of Rapture. And this is what she says. The Talmud fleshes out the irony of the time frame, figuring the people's betrayal as erotic treachery. So she's talking about the sin of the golden calf. And she's already saying that it's erotic treachery, that it's a kind of adultery. And here she quotes, said Ula, shameless is the bride who plays the harlot while still under her wedding canopy. Said Rabbi Mari, son of Shmuel's daughter, what verse refers to this? While the king still sat at his banquet, my spikenard gave forth its fragrance. Said Rav, yet his love was still with us, for gave forth is written, but not made offensive. Okay, there's a little bit of like typical Talmudic back and forth with words, but they're taking a verse from Song of Songs, and from there they're understanding what happened at the sin of the golden calf to be like a bride under a canopy acting as a harlot cheating on her husband. And now we have more. And this is Aviva Zornberg's actual commentary. The outrage of infidelity is limned in a grotesque fantasy of synchronicity. I told you her words are pretty dense. The bride is still under her wedding canopy. Morally, the Midrashist's voice rises to a scream. The spatial image of the wedding canopy conveys an even more bizarre temporal image. At the very moment of commitment to her husband, she surrealistically plays the harlot with her lover. The image puts the reader under great strain. The inconceivable scenario conveys the inconceivable secret of the golden calf. So what Aviva Gottlieb-Dorberg is doing here is she's saying that Bnei Israel wanting to have a golden calf was an act of cheating. They had just committed themselves to God, to monotheism, and all of a sudden, only 40 days later, they build a entirely different God to worship. And this could be frustrating because there are rules about not doing that. But what Aviva Gottlieb-Zorberg is saying is that it's frustrating because this is a break of covenantal promise and covenantal love. That under the wedding canopy at Har Sinai, that is where they are camped out, where they had just received the Torah, and they're already worshiping something else, which is very sad. And it's supposed to make you angry, like this analogy. You're supposed to feel kind of what God felt. No wonder God is so angry, right? When we were looking at the dynamics from before, that God wants to get close to them, Bnei Israel retreat, that Bnei Israel build a totally different God. And of course, God's going to be angry, right? Like I think we often think about like, oh, the Old Testament God, right? That's like how we talk about God in a secular context, or this is with like the shadow of Christianity that, oh, the Old Testament God is always angry. But how could you not be angry after this kind of experience, right? Like God, on the one hand, transcends emotion. On the other hand, this is a way for us to connect with God stronger, to see that God is not totally impartial, but God is a being that we are in relationship to. And so, of course, God is going to be angry when we do something that is not only angry, but hurt, right? Like, I'm sure we all had moments in our lives where we felt, hopefully on a much smaller scale, a sense of betrayal or frustration. You want to destroy something. You want to punch a pillow, or I don't know, stomp your feet on the ground. And this is the godly equivalent of that God can't even handle being with Bnei Israel after such a betrayal. And there's like a need for some kind of conduit. And so then, with all of this in mind, thinking again about the Gemara that we saw, where Bnei Israel are suggesting that Moshe slept with someone in the camp. Where is that coming from? Unless this is them actually kind of reconciling or trying to bring to the surface some of their own confusing feelings they have about what they did in their building of the golden calf. And then maybe a sense of jealousy that Moshe gets to still interact with God after all that and get to enter in the sense of divine intimacy in the Ohel Moed. That I personally think like might be what's happening there. But it's a bit of a claim. Like, I think that's a little creative. It's definitely not what the Gemara is saying. But to me, I feel like there are some things that are written in the tradition, you just have to accept them as is. And some of them you have to think, well, why exactly are the rabbis telling us this? Like, what's the point of this sharing? And I think that this might be the point of sharing such a rumor about Moshe. I'm curious how that lands with people, if that feels kind of outlandish, if it's shocking to even, I guess, be thinking about Moshe or Bnei Israel in this way. What do people think about this understanding? Are there any, it's a confusing analogy, or like, there's a few steps. Does anyone feel like they need any clarification? Yeah, Marilyn, please.
I had heard that, during the worship of the golden calf, there was not only idolatry going on, but also a lot of sexual licentiousness.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, so it says in the text, "Vayakumu l'tzachek," which sounds, the term l'tzachek could be to laugh. There's like a lot of usages of that term of getting up to do that throughout Tanakh, and it often doesn't really mean laughing based off of the context, right? Like the other times that it comes up is when Potiphar's wife is trying to seduce Joseph, and so that's clearly in a sexual context. It comes up with Yishmael and Yitzchak, and that adds a whole other interesting dynamic to their relationship. It's between husband and wife with Yitzchak and Rivka, and then now it's here. So I mean, it's not so shocking in the sense that there were many ancient Near Eastern cultic practices where worship of idols also was with acts of sexual licentiousness. So there is like a kind of like right on the nose. You don't even have to try with the metaphor, like worshiping something other than the monotheistic God often probably entailed that as well. But yeah, I think there's a reason why it's there. And so it could be that they're like thinking about those acts that they did while they were at the golden calf, and also that like, those things go part and parcel, because when you're worshiping something that's other than God, that's like where that metaphor of cheating, I guess, can come in. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
I have a quick comment for you.
Sure. Go for it, Barry.
This is blatant stuff here. And I think what creates this space need by God from us and this reconsideration and giving us a chance to cool is uniquely enough because through the Torah Parashot and the texts regarding our slavery period, that when we were slaves to Pharaoh, this seems like our people were relatively connected and honorable and respectful of each other then, and now we're backsliding. Now we're backsliding from that which merited us taking out, and the forward covenant that God says, you get all the benefits I tell you. You get Torah, you get the promised land. All you have to promise is that you will be my people, and you will buy into my covenant, and you make that covenant, and I'm making this. And all of a sudden we're backsliding. I think God is not emotionally angry as much as God is disappointed that the free will we are using is backsliding. Right.
That's interesting. So you see this is like a pivotal time for Bnei Israel to
we
like not act under the influence of God, and that this is what they do. It's extra painful.
That's what I think.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Does anyone else have anything they want to share before we move on? Okay, well, feel free to jump in. What I want to provide as, I guess, a way to kind of, I don't know if it's tie all these things together, but provide a different kind of tikkun, I would say, like a reparation for this broken relationship between God and Bnei Israel, is to see then how Moshe attempts to get close to God as the chapter progresses, right? So what I want to understand is, why did this section about Moshe and the relationship to the tent of meeting, and now this Talmudic understanding of the rumor that was going on, happens like in the middle? Before then, we have the sin of the golden calf, and then what comes afterward. And that's the story with the 13 attributes in which Moshe and God interact and divide intimacy. And so what I want to look at now is seeing that as a potential reparation of relationship. God is hurt, as we saw, right? God was cheated on, God was betrayed, and God feels so angry that God just wants to destroy whatever comes in God's midst, which is really fair and I think incredibly relatable in a really powerful way, as opposed to one that challenges God's omnipotence. And I think if we see Moshe as trying to heal God, who is hurt and is feeling a sense of betrayal, of rejection, to see how then Moshe decides to meet God on God's own relational terms is really beautiful. And also what Moshe creates that then can become accessible to us as a nation, even in our distance. I'm excited to show it to you. Okay, so this is from the next part of the chapter. It's one of my favorite passages in all of Tanakh. I think it's so beautiful that how Moshe wants to connect with God. And I think there's also so many amazing parallels in our own lives and how we want to connect with people. Okay, so it says, Vayomer Moshe el Adonai, Re'eh, ata omer elai, ha'al et ha'am hazeh, ata lo hadatani et asher tishlach imi, ve'ata amarta yidaticha v'shem, v'gam matzata chen be'enai. So Moshe says to God, so you said to me, go lead these people, but you've actually never even told me who you are and who you are that is sending me. And you have said to me, I have singled you out, Moshe and Bnei Israel, by name, and you have given me grace. ועתה, אם נא מצאתי חן בעיניך, הודיעני נא את דרכיך, ואדעך למען אמצא חן בעיניך, וראה כי עמך הגוי הזה. And now, if this so pleases you, God, I would love to know your ways. I would love to understand who you are, that I can understand how best to serve you. And also remember that Bnei Israel are your people too, right? Because Moshe is trying to interact and become intimate with God, but as we said before, Moshe is not just Moshe. Moshe is also the leader of Bnei Israel. So he's representing Bnei Israel right now and wanting to say, I just want to know who you are. Like God, we're so scared of you. God, we did not worship you properly, but I don't even understand what I'm relating to. I was so wowed by the fantastic thunder and lightning on Har Sinai, but who are you behind all that? I don't need all the fanfare. That's what it sounds like to me. Okay. So God says, I will go and lead and lighten your burden, meaning I'm going to tell you a little bit more of who I am. And then Moshe then says, unless you go in the lead, do not make us leave this place. Okay. For how shall we know that your people have gained your favor unless you go with us, that we may be distinguished, your people and I, from every people on the face of the earth? Meaning, we're referencing back before when God was so angry. God says, I'm going to send you a messenger who's going to send you to Bnei Israel, to Eretz Israel. I'm not getting involved. Moshe is saying, but if we're going to show the rest of the world that this is God's chosen nation, we need you to be around. We need you to be present with us. Okay. God gets convinced. God says, okay, you're right. I'm going to do this thing that you've asked because you have found favor in my eyes, and I will let you know my name. Vayomar, har'eni na et kodecha. Moshe says, please show me your glory. God then says, Vayomer, ani a'avir kol tuvi al panecha, vekarati v'shem Adonai lefanecha, v'chanoti et asher achon, v'richamti et asher arachim. God says, I will pass by all my goodness before you, and I will proclaim the name of God and the grace that I grant and the compassion I will show. Vayomer lo tuchal lirot et panai ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. God says, I can't actually show you who I am because anyone who sees me will die. Okay. Vayomer Adonai hine makom iti v'nitzavta al atzur. But God comes up with a different solution. I'll give you another way to get to know me. Go stand in the cleft of this rock. Vaya ba'avor kvodi v'samticha b'nikrat atzur v'sakoti chapi alecha al ad ovri. And when I pass by, and you are in that crack in the rock, I will make sure that your eyes are covered so you see just the right amount, to make sure that does not hurt you. So before we even get to the grand finale and seeing how it works, already the relationship that Moshe is trying to build with God is one that is coming from a sense of brokenness. God is feeling timid after seeing how Bnei Israel worshipped another God and is frustrated with them. Moshe is kind of tiptoeing and saying, well, let me try and meet you where you are at. I want to understand you. I want to fill that distance that we have right now. And me, not just as Moshe, but me as the representative of Bnei Israel. And it works. Like if you imagine, again, this is a kiviyachol, right? We're not saying God is like has human emotions and those kinds of capacities, but you can imagine a relationship in which there are two people. One is incredibly hurt. And how do you then approach that person? If you're stern with them, they're going to retreat. And you can imagine Moshe kind of just like slowly making God more comfortable, coaxing God back into relationship, and also giving it on God's terms, right? God, how do you want us to relate to you? I just want to know who you are. Tell me how to do it. And then God says, great, go in this little cleft in the rock. Okay. Now this is skipping to chapter 34, and this is the part that maybe you'll recognize. You might also recognize some of these texts because this is actually what we read, all of what we said so far, like in the chapter 33 in here. This is what we read every minor fast day for Torah reading, which is also really interesting. Can maybe give us some insight about what exactly the fast days are for. Maybe minor fast is an opportunity to think about our own connection and divine intimacy with God. And so it says, God descended in a cloud, and Moshe then stood there, and God proclaimed the name of God. Vayavor Adonai al panav vayikra. God passed by Moshe's face, and then Moshe said, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Apayim v'Rav Chesed v'Emet. Okay, God, a compassionate God, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness. Notzer Chesed la'alafim, nosei avon v'afesha v'chata'a v'na'akeh. Lo yinakeh poked avon avot al banim v'al bnei banim al shileshim v'al ribeim. Extending kindness to the 1000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, yet not remitting all punishment, but visiting the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children upon the 3rd, 4th generations. Okay, so it's a little strict, but okay. And immediately Moshe rushes to bow to the ground and bow to God. And Moshe then takes the language that God has been saying about Bnei Israel this whole time, right? God has been saying, Kshei Oref, that this is a stiff-necked people. This is what God has been saying ever since they'd had the sin of the golden calf. This is the grudge that God has been holding. And what Moshe now says, if you found favor in my eyes, now that I've met you in this more intimate way on your own terms, please come join us again. Do not send out a messenger to be the one to take us to the land of Israel. We want you to be doing it. And yes, these people are Kshei Oref. They are stiff-necked, but we also would love for you to be able to forgive us and our sins and to pardon them. And so what I think this whole drama, tying it up together, is that what Moshe provides here is meeting God on God's own terms when it comes to divine intimacy and what does it mean to get close. And Moshe is also offering the opportunity of forgiveness, right? There was a cheating, there was a betrayal. That was very painful. We see that especially highlighted in this projection that Bnei Israel have onto Moshe that we saw in the Gemara. But there's an opportunity to fix it. We don't have to, there's always an opportunity to repair relationship. And even in something so painful of a betrayal, of a bride on her wedding night going to become a harlot, that now we have the opportunity to repair it. And this last part becomes the paradigmatic liturgy that we have on Yom Kippur, on all of the days leading up to Yom Kippur, for what true forgiveness can be. That forgiveness this is just a formula that we say these words of the 13 attributes of God and we hope for the best, but that it comes within this story of attempt to getting closer to God and rebuilding a relationship, right? Like it's never just about Yom Kippur being the day that we ask God to repent all of our sins and a kind of magic, it disappears. But it's always about seeing how the relationship might be a little broken or a little distant. And our job, starting from Elul onward, is to think, how are we going to get close to God again? How are we going to be kind of like Moshe and do a little bit of a dance in intimacy and coming closer and meeting God where God wants to be? Sometimes that means meeting in the cleft of a rock and seeing God that way. It doesn't necessarily mean close up, right? There is an inherent distance that's necessary because it's God, but that maybe it's more about building relationship up again. And then the opportunity for forgiveness can ensue. So I hope by having this whole narrative kind of put together, we can see how the sin of the golden calf felt like not just a sin that was performed, but a betrayal of Bnei Israel of God, and how painful that was. No wonder God was going to act out and be so angry. But then to say that there's an opportunity for a relationship and for Moshe to be that conduit for us, but then providing us the liturgy that then we all say, and providing Bnei Israel the tool for forgiveness, the opportunity to be forgiven, as long as we also try and build up intimate relationship as we go along. So I hope that this can provide a whole new layer to that relationship, to even see it relationally. I think like talking about God in this way, sometimes we're a little scared to do it because it does sound like we're talking about God being limited. But personally, I think that this makes me feel much more connected to God. I think that if it's going to do that, like, why not? And to recognize, of course, like all these things are somewhat metaphorical, but to see my relationship with God as one that I can think of as a kind of intimacy and slowly getting to God's terms, and that I have the opportunity to be forgiven, I think is really beautiful. And also imitatio Dei, we're all supposed to be like God. So if God can forgive in this way and we can become close to God in this way, so too this can translate into our own human interpersonal relations. And we can be thinking about it as an interesting paradigm for how we get close to all kinds of people in our lives and how we take care of them. I'll stop sharing the screen now. If anyone has any final thoughts or questions about the piece, I think it's a pretty, I would say, intense but powerful read. I was very excited about it. but it's definitely a little different than how we talk about God. So I'm curious what you think.
I have some, but I'll wait until anybody else speaks who wants to speak. I'll wait my turn, and I'm sorry for my verbosity.
No problem.
Okay, this is,
Don't be sorry for your verbosity. Is someone else going to speak?
Marilyn, were you going to say something?
yes, something I don't understand. The last 3 years, I've attended Slichot on Zoom rather than in person.
Mhm.
And so I wasn't part of the minyan. I mean, I wasn't davening with a minyan. And so I couldn't say the 13 attributes of God because I wasn't davening in a minyan. And that's one of my favorite prayers.
Yeah.
And Rabbi Wolkenfeld said, well, if you can recite it with trope, then you can say it outside of a minyan. Well, I'm not going to learn trope just to say that.
Well, I'm happy to send you a recording if that makes it easier. The trope isn't as difficult as you might think. So if that's problem solving number one, happy to provide that.
Take that deal, Marilyn. Take it.
It is funny, right? Because we're seeing like in the text, like Moshe is not in a quorum of 10 men when he says that. I think that the way that it got translated rabbinically is that the mechanism of it being a way to bring us closer to God became something that was less personal on a one-to-one basis, but one that we do as an entire community, which is why minyan gets thrown into it. But I like the idea of us being able to cultivate our own personal relationships with God. I think that's like it doesn't have to be an either or, right? Like there's our own personal relationships with God, there's our communal relationship with God, and like a sense of concentric circles outward. So I think like I understand the technical need for the minyan, but that's why I'm happy to help you think about the trope option more seriously, because I think that of course it should be available to you. So I'm happy to make it more accessible for you if you would like, if that would be helpful.
Do it, Marilyn.
Audrey, were you going to say something before?
I was just wondering, like, what would happen to God if this group of people didn't follow him and believe in him or her?
Well, what happened to God? That's a good question.
Idea of Judaism coming out of, I think, like Zoroastrianism, and that there were many religions, and apparently, they decided to build a calf and start worshiping it. But like anthropomorphization.
God,
yeah. Like God sounds kind of needy. Like we have to make God feel better, and don't worry, God, we're with you now. I'll lead the people to follow you. I mean, is it the idea that all the gods that did not have followers died out?
I've never heard that about Zoroastrianism. It's possible. But what I would want to talk about is, I think the way that we think about needs, right? Like, I think the way we think about needs is that there are kinds of weaknesses, right? And that's the theological problem. It's like, oh, well, God doesn't have any needs because God is God. I wonder if a potential reframing that I think everyone in our society could benefit from is that needs are necessary, right? So that say when one has a need, does that mean that they are weak? If someone needs to be able to eat food or to be loved and cared for in a certain way, if we frame it as a kind of weakness, then we frame it as negative. And I wonder if something we can be thinking about differently as a community. Like there's a lot of work to be done. Is thinking about God having needs that then limit God's omnipotence. I think that there are a lot of thinkers that have begun thinking this way. So Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel talks about this a lot in God in Search of Man, which is his work on the relationship between like prophets and also Bnei Israel to God. And Heschel is not afraid to talk about God in this way. And I think an even more contemporary example, and this is like really kind of shaking things up a bit, is Mara Benjamin, who wrote a book called The Obligated Self. She's a contemporary philosopher of Franz Rosenzweig, who is a 20th century philosopher. So she writes about him. And she talks about in her book, Obligated Self, how when she became a mother of a child, that her relationship to God and neediness changed significantly, where often the analogy would be like God is the parent and we are the child. And what she actually suggests is that God is the baby and we are the parent, which is a really intense metaphor. And her point is that God can sometimes be kind of like a crying baby, and we have to take care of God. Like, we don't question it, right? Like, usually we'd say, wow, the idea that God would have needs is so preposterous. And yet, like, when there's the analogy of when we think about a baby, we don't think, oh, babies are so weird, they have needs. Like, oh, obviously I'm going to help the baby. So I think that maybe there's an opportunity to be on a soapbox, Audrey. So maybe I should, I don't know if I even directly answered your question, but I think I wanted to provide different models for thinking about needs and God and needs. Like, God sounds a little needy, and maybe that's fine.
Oh, I like it. I think we should have a reading list for our class.
Oh my gosh, a syllabus.
Can we? Can we have
Careful, Audrey.
I don't know,
I
like
have too
a
much fun.
syllabus, but just like a list of suggested readings.
That's good. We can have like a running Google Doc. That could be fun.
Maybe, or you could post it with the
Yeah,
YouTube
I could
or
put
whatever.
suggested
You
reading
know what I
at the end
mean?
of
Like
the source
suggested
sheet.
reading.
That's good. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, but all good points. Amazing. Did anyone else? Oh, Mina wrote something in the group. We were created in God's image, and we need to love as much as we need food and water. I mean, that is true. And so if we're creating God's image and God created us with these sense of needs, they seem pretty holy. I'm pretty into that. That's great. Thank you. Yeah, very.
Is there anybody else want to speak before me? I'm willing to do that, and I will be brief anyway.
Yeah, and then we'll make sure to wrap up on time, because I know we'll maybe one minute over. Okay, yeah, go
Okay,
for
I'll
it.
be brief. I don't think God is acting like a crying baby on God's own behalf. God is doing what we learn about the Torah language doing. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be directive. I mean, this is how I feel. I feel God is doing what God is doing because God is relating us to see what God is feeling on our terms. So God is using our limitations to couch God's behavior and God's words. And that's where this is coming from. Like the Torah says things that are not complementary to God, but that's not what it's intended to do. It's intended to give us an understanding. And that's what God is doing. God doesn't need to do these things in the need sense with a capital N. God needs to do it because of God's own rules, that God wants us to want to be his people. And in the generic case, excuse me. And that's where this is coming from. Now, my point is this. At this passage that you just read, it displays, again, in my belief, the brilliance of this whole situation. And God set this up. And God chose Moshe. And Moshe was brilliant. As human beings go, as flawed beings go, Moshe was brilliant on the harp. And God was brilliant to choose Moshe. And he must be looking great to his heavenly court for doing that. And Moshe has three clients here. Our people, himself, our forefathers, and maybe you could make it a fourth, God himself. God, Moshe was representing all sides and saving everybody's face and the deal and the covenant and having Torah come to the world. And Moshe is the instrument and God is the master puppeteer. And this is all happening and it's brilliant. So I can't go into detail because I promised to be brief, but think about that. It's brilliant.
Yeah, well, I think this is actually a great way to end off, right? Like, it's true, God technically does not have all the descriptors we just had, right? Because God transcends all these things and we're limited by human language. However, like, God created us in this way to be able to share in this capacity. And so it's still intentional to say that God, to show God in this needy way, that still teaches us something. And that's the power of imitatio Dei, right? That, like, we can be able to desire to be like God, and God shows up pretty needy here. So, like, we can also learn from that as well. There could have been more neutral ways to tell this story. It could have been less messy. I find it, like, feels very messy. It's like there's the betrayal, then there's all this back and forth distancing with the tents, and then we have this story in the Gemara about the cheating and the rumors. And then Moshe slowly trying to build that connection with God again. And all of that is in our Torah. And so that is coming to show us that, like, things can be like that in life sometimes. There can be a sense of messiness and there can be a sense of needs. And even if God technically on a metaphysical level doesn't do those things, this is how it was portrayed to us. So therefore there's something to be gleaned from it. And hopefully that can be our charge, since I know we're over time, that hopefully seeing the Parsha in this way, as seeing it as kind of like this divine intimacy dance on the back and forths of that we can see our own needs and relationships being nurtured, and like Mina said, that all of us need love. Those are all godly things to want. And thank you so much for learning with me this evening. And I appreciate it very much. There won't be class next week. The Maharats are all going to bake matzah in Rhode Island, which is gonna be really fun. But we will resume back the week afterward, and I'm excited to learn with you all then.
Great. Have a safe and happy trip.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. Bye, everyone.
Go off. Brilliant class. Great class. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Amazing. See you all next time.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.